Welcome. My name is Lauren Yokel, and I am joining you today from the Ancient World Galleries at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Thank you for joining us for today's online event, Spotlight on Conservation, Ancient Objects. Joining me today is my colleague, Leanne Barnes-Gordon. She's a conservator here at the MFA, and she is joining us from one of the museum's conservation labs. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, glad to be joining you all.
Great. All right, well, before we launch into today's program, there is just a little bit of logistics we want to go over with you. First, you can see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. We do want to communicate with you during today's program, so please use the chat to send in any questions you have or comments along the way, and we will do our best to keep our eye on those and respond to you as they come in. One more thing, we do have a transcript and closed captions available for today's program. To enable closed captions, you're going to go to the bottom of the Zoom window, click the up arrow button next to closed caption, and then click on show subtitle to start displaying the captions. All right, we'd love to know who is with us today. I think some of you have already done this, but if you have not, please write into the chat and let us know where you're joining us from, what grade level you are. If you're a part of a classroom, your teacher can write in the chat for your group. If you're a homeschool or just joining on your own, please also let us know where you're at. While you're doing that, I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to tell you about where we are today. So the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, or the MFA, as you may hear us call it during the program today, is located in Boston, Massachusetts, which is the homeland of different Algonquin nations, including the Massachusetts. We acknowledge the history of the land that our building occupies, and we are working to amplify Native American voices and stories in our museum. We can all learn more about the Massachusetts people who continue to be stewards of this land by visiting massachusettstribe.org. All right, well, hopefully you've had a second to write in on the chat. If you haven't done it yet, that's okay. You can continue to send those in as we go. So it looks like we have sixth graders with us today. I see a group from, it says Windsor students from down the street. So I guess you are close by to the MFA. All right, we'll continue to send in any details about your group or where you're coming from, and I can check back on that in a second. So for today's program, we have about 30 minutes to get to spend together. We are going to be learning about the work of conservation with Leanne. And so we'll get to look at a few objects that she has with her in the conservation lab right now. And then we are also going to look at another work of art that's here in the gallery where I'm located that she's also been working on recently. But before we kind of move into looking at some of the specific artworks, I thought we could start by taking just a couple of minutes to talk about what we mean by art conservation. So Leanne, could you start us out with just a general definition of what that term means?
Yes, so art conservation is the profession dedicated to the care and long-term preservation of cultural heritage. This includes fine art like sculpture and paintings, but also materials of historical significance, utilitarian objects, musical instruments, clothing, books, and even archaeological objects. Conservation includes activities to prevent objects from being damaged, like safe handling and storage, and it also includes cleaning and repairing things that might be broken.
Okay. So then what is the sort of general path that a person might take if they wanted to become a conservator? And I'm curious too, just what your background is and how you got interested in conservation.
Sure. So the training to become a conservator includes getting a master's degree in art conservation, which is typically a 3-year graduate program. To get into those programs, it helps to have backgrounds in art history, chemistry, and studio art. And I learned about conservation when I was in my early 20s. I was working as an archaeologist and I met a conservator through that work. And I decided that I wanted to change careers. And I got into the graduate program at the University of Delaware.
Okay. Well, our program today, we're focusing specifically on the conservation of ancient objects. Can you kind of explain to us what exactly qualifies as an ancient object and what are some of the kind of artworks that you're working on?
Yes. So lately, I've been working on a lot of ceramics. That includes pottery that was used for containers like food or oil or wine. And I've also been working on other types of objects like gold jewelry, glass vessels, wood boxes, and marble sculpture. And at the MFA, we generally use the term ancient to refer to objects in the collection that are more than 1,500 years old. These objects are usually archaeological, meaning they were buried long ago in the past and have been found through excavation. We use this term a lot when we talk about materials in our collection that are from the early Mediterranean cultures. And the 3 objects that we're going to talk about today all come from this region around the Mediterranean, specifically from the countries of Turkey and Italy. But these modern boundaries didn't exist back then. This whole area was once part of the ancient Greek and Roman world.
All right. And while you were explaining that, I had up our map so they could see the locations that we were talking about there. So the MFA's collection includes about 500,000 works of art, and they actually span from ancient times all the way up to the present. So if we've been describing, what qualifies as ancient objects, I'm wondering if you can tell us what some of the other areas of focus are for the other conservators who work here at the museum.
Right. So we are currently in the objects conservation lab, but there are 6 other conservation labs all throughout the museum that specialize in other types of materials like paintings, textiles, furniture, paper, 2D Asian artworks, and scientific research. There are about 30 conservators in all in the museum.
Okay, thanks. I actually see a question came in on the chat, which I will share out and we can respond to, but I think we'll probably get into more of this as we move into the program too. But a question came in that said, what are some of the ways you can conserve an artifact? Do you ever layer it with any liquids, like how amber can conserve things?
Oh, I think that the short answer would be yes. There are some types of objects, especially in natural history collections, that do get preserved in fluid. So that would be an example of something like that.
All right. Well, keep sending in your questions. We will definitely come back and check on those as we go through. So Leanne, we talked earlier, you described how a conservator often has a background in art history, science, and studio art. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how you use your knowledge in each of those areas, and maybe we can see some examples now of the artworks you have with you.
Yes, absolutely. So we do refer to the foundations of conservation as art history, science, and studio art. Sometimes we call this the 3-legged stool of art conservation. And to illustrate some of these concepts, I'm going to start by showing you one of these objects that we have in the lab right now. It's a silver bowl. It was recently on display in our Near Eastern galleries, and it was brought to the lab because it was treated because it's going to go on loan for an exhibition. And when I first look at an object, I use my background in art history to understand what I'm seeing. I think about what I know about materials, tools, and techniques that people had available to them to make certain things. Then I look closely at the object, sort of like a detective, to see if the object matches those expectations. And in this case, we're looking at a bowl that's from ancient Persia. It's approximately 2,500 years old. It's archaeological, meaning it probably spent several thousands of years buried under layers of soil. And here we're going to show you a slide that shows you some close-ups of the bowl so you can see some details that these give us clues about how the object was made. So on the underside of the bowl, first we see that the bowl is made from one single sheet of metal. It would have been a flat sheet of metal when it started out. And on the underside of the bowl, we see a very tiny indentation that is the kind of thing you would see, the small circular depression that tells us that this was actually spun on a lathe, which is a tool that moves and spins really fast. And you would use another tool to press that sheet of metal against a shape or a form, maybe a wooden block that's shaped like this bowl. And you would spin that sheet of metal and press it over the mold to form it into this shape. And then we can tell that there's a detail on your screen on the bottom left that shows the decorations on the inside, which is kind of a spider web type pattern with some little lotus flowers around the outside. These patterns would have been cut into the metal with a tool sort of like a chisel. You can also see that there's some areas of gold decoration. These gold pieces would have been applied to the bowl, but we're not actually always sure from just looking how they were applied because there's a couple of different methods. So we can use scientific techniques to look closer at the bowl and try and understand that better. So the next slide here, you see a photograph of the MFA's conservation scientist, Richard Newman, who helped me analyze the bowl using scientific instruments. So he's sitting in front of that instrument. And on the bottom left of your screen, you see that we took a tiny sample of the metal, smaller than the tip of a pencil. We embedded that sample in a resin mixture. You can see what that looks like in that photo on the bottom left. Then that resin mixture with the sample were put into the scientific instruments, and you can see what we see through the instrument. That's the image in the center of your screen in black and white. That's what the sample looks like under magnification. The large gray area is the silver substrate of the bowl, and we can tell from the analysis that it's made from almost pure silver with a little bit of copper and gold. And then we can see in that image the gold layer, which is brighter, kind of white toward the bottom of the image. And that is the gold. And we can see that it's about 10 microns thick, which is incredibly thin. And it's made from gold that has a fair amount of silver in it. So it's not a pure gold. From this, we can also tell that the gold decoration on the bowl is a thin foil and that it would have been cut into different shapes, applied with pressure, and then heated to fuse it to the silver. So that explains why when we look at the bowl now, we see so much of the gold decoration is actually missing. This is because the process of fusing with heat is not the most secure way to apply gilding, but it is also not surprising because of how old this bowl is and the fact that it was buried in the soil for many, many years.
So
So
Leanne,
then, yeah.
I have a question that came in that is kind of asking about the how old some of these objects are.
Mhm.
And they were, I don't think asking about this particular work of art, but they want to know how we can tell how old the artifacts are. How do we estimate that?
All right, yes, there's a couple of ways. One way is we can tell by their style. In some cases, there's objects that we know are dated to a certain time period or area, and we know because they change in style over time, just like how things change nowadays with trends. And so we can, those other objects that they might be similar to, sometimes those objects may be dated to a more specific time period if they were found in excavation, which means they were found in a scientific method that looks at different layers of the earth as you scientifically excavate. And so there's certain things in those layers that help us with dates. There could be things like coins, or which have a very specific date, maybe even written on them. But there's also things like other methods like radiocarbon dating and other scientific techniques that help us date the layers of the soil that the objects came from. So those are two ways.
Okay. And somebody also asked about the oldest artifact that we have in our collection, which I believe is a vessel that's in the shape of a hare, an animal.
Yes, it
And
is.
I think it dates to like 6,000 BCE. Is that right?
I'm not 100%
Okay.
sure about the date, but it is really in about that old. And you are
Yeah.
correct. I know
Yeah.
it's actually in the gallery next to where this object lives,
Yeah.
from the same part of the world. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I think oh yeah, there was also a question that asked how rare is it for us to have a fully intact ancient artwork?
It is rare. It is rare, and we are going to show you some examples next of objects that are not intact, that were
Okay.
broken.
All right.
Yep.
Well, before we move to that, then, do you want to tell us, or I think we want to see kind of the before and after maybe on the bowl?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So are we looking at the slide of the before and the after?
I'll pull it up right now and you can tell us what you did for the treatment.
Great. So the bowl had, when we brought it to the lab after about a month ago, it didn't look like it does now. It actually had areas of dull gray iridescence on the surface. There were some fingerprints, and there were some areas of loose gold decoration. And these were some of the most concerning issues that we needed to address with what we call treatment. And so the silver tarnish is a result of sulfides in the air and in the environment and pollution over the decades that it had been on display. And this was addressed by polishing with gentle abrasives, and the loose gold was stabilized using an adhesive.
Well, I'm going to pull down the slide on the bowl, and I think if we can move on to the next object. I know you've told us a little bit about how you use, your art historical background, how science comes into play. So can you tell us with another object how the studio art aspect is used in the conservation lab?
Yes, definitely. So a background in studio art and various crafts are extremely helpful in understanding how things are made. But this also refers to hand skills or manual dexterity that a conservator needs to be able to carry out treatment activities. So many people acquire and maintain these skills through personal experience in art and craft making. And I'm going to show you some of the objects and tools and materials that we use to treat them. Right now we're looking at an Etruscan ceramic vessel. So this is from Italy, and you can see that it was broken in the past, probably when it was buried in the ground. And just to illustrate some of the activities that we do that require manual dexterity, we're in the process of assembling this. So what we have done is mix some adhesives. So we make these ourselves. We use different resins that are appropriate for different types of materials. For this material, I'm using an acrylic resin. You can see little beads of it here on the table that I mixed up. And now it's a liquid. Sometimes I make it thicker and put it into a tube like this. But in each case, I use a really fine brush to apply it to the edges of the ceramic. And then kind of like putting a puzzle together, each piece goes onto the object slowly and has to be aligned. And then we have to put it into an orientation so that it can dry. And then once an object is put together, I'm going to show you some of the next steps using another Etruscan object that is on the table right over here. I'm going to move over to that.
While you make your way over there, somebody did have another question about the silver bowl, asking if it was, if the bowl was rare at the time that it was made because of its use of materials like gold and silver.
Yes, that bowl is very precious. It would have been not only rare, but definitely unique. It would have been a very special object.
Okay. And then another
Yes.
question that I think was probably for the bowl as well was whether or not you apply any chemicals or cleaning products when you're treating it.
So that particular bowl has been treated in the past, both with chemical treatments and with you could call cleaning products, although we don't use cleaning products like you would use going to the store. We actually make our own so that we can be very consistent and sure about the ingredients that we use in the mixtures that we clean things with.
Okay. All right. I'll let you get back to what you were going to show us.
Great. So once an object is put together, we sometimes don't have all the pieces. So if you're looking at this ceramic, we can see that there's some missing areas. So sometimes we recreate these. And in the areas that are joining together, where the fragments come together, sometimes we have to fill in the cracks. So we have different types of materials. We call them fill materials. Sometimes we have to use things like plaster. We mix plaster with water to create a liquid, and then we can, this is actually an example of a mold where I've cast in plaster a little replica of a handle. This is for a different ceramic, but this is just to show you an example of casting a piece. And then sometimes we can cast a piece directly on an object by putting some backing material behind it and putting that liquid plaster in place. We sometimes use, for smaller parts, we might use spackle. This is kind of a material a little bit like you might do repairs with at home, but different. And we might use tools like spatulas and dental tools and other types of things to smooth that material into the cracks. And then we have to shape it and level it after to make it smooth and match the area around it. You have things like sandpaper and files and really cool little tools that help us work in really small areas. And then once we have those fills and those losses filled in, we sometimes start painting them. Here you can see some examples where someone has started painting, and I'm going to show you some of the materials we use when we paint to match the surroundings. We sometimes use paints like acrylic paints or watercolors. Sometimes we mix pigments into into other mediums so we can get the colors that we like. Here's an example of a palette. This is where I start using the colors we have to mix them together and make custom colors like this. And we can look and see if they match on the object. And then when we're ready to go, we use really small brushes like these to paint and to tone those different areas. And those
And
are
I
just
actually,
some of the tools we use.
yeah, I had a question come in regarding the piece I think you're showing us now about how long did it take to actually put that back together?
So putting something like this together would probably could take probably 50 to 75 hours. So 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay. And then somebody also asked,
Sorry.
what would happen if you were to put a piece in the wrong place when you were reassembling a piece like this?
That's a good question. So we try to match, to find all those, what we call them joins, like a puzzle. We try to put them together as puzzle pieces before we use the adhesive. So we kind of we try not to let that happen, but sometimes we do have to take things apart, especially if maybe we find a small piece that we missed the first time around, and maybe you suddenly find out that you have this missing piece, then you'd have to take it apart. And we can do that with the adhesive that we use. We choose them intentionally so that we can remove them. So we have a couple methods to remove them, or we can soften them and just move them enough to get a new piece in. But everything we do, we try our very best to use materials that we can reverse so that we protect the original material as much as possible. That's one of our main goals, is to preserve all of the original material that we can.
Okay, great. I actually see one of the classes who has been on with us, they have to sign off and head out. So I just want to say thank you guys for joining us. We hope to see you on another program sometime, but I think Leanne and I have a few more minutes to show you another object, which is actually in the gallery where I'm located. So I'm going to flip my camera around so you can see it. It's the large piece on the wall in front of me. And this is an ancient Greek sarcophagus rim. It was made around 500 BC. And in the gallery, you see it sort of displayed upright against the wall. But originally, it would have been the flat upper surface of a rectangular coffin or sarcophagus. The lower part, the rectangular part, is missing, as is the lid that would have covered the opening of the coffin. But Leanne has recently been working on this piece. And I have actually this photograph of her in the galleries when she was doing some of that work recently, which I'll put up. And I was wondering, Leanne, if you, in our last few minutes here, if you could just tell us a little bit about the ongoing work that you're doing on this piece.
Yes, definitely. So that is a picture of the stage that we're at right now in the galleries. But I'd like to show you a few pictures of what it looked like before we started. So if Lauren can pull up maybe one slide of what it looked like. Here you see before we started treatment, the sarcophagus had been previously assembled. So you're looking at it, how it looked on view 30 years ago when it was in the galleries. It had gotten some stains on it. Those stains are from previous treatments from some adhesives. There was also scuff marks on the sides of it. There's black marks from being bumped into in the galleries. And there was chewing gum stuck to the side of it. And some of the old repairs were failing and crumbling and falling off. So all of those things had to be cleaned and repaired before we could move on to the stage that we're at now. And I don't know, Lauren, can you show a picture of us bringing that object into the gallery?
Absolutely. And I didn't say that. This gallery where I'm located right now just recently reopened after being undergoing renovations for the past year or two. So here's the image you asked for.
Yes, so here you can see we've got a whole team of people helping move this object because this sarcophagus rim, it's made of ceramic, but it weighs probably 400 or 500 pounds. So it's not something that just a couple people can lift. So we're using equipment here to bring it from the lab down to the galleries and install it on the wall. That's just one step of the work we did to get it ready for display. And maybe we
Oh,
can, yeah, look at a picture of the final stage that we're at now.
yeah, I can pull that up. While I get that, we have had some questions come in about when was the sarcophagus rim found, if we know anything about that. And then, of course, people are wondering if there were any human remains when this was discovered too. I don't know if we know that. So I'll
Um,
find the image while you.
sure. So we have had this sarcophagus rim has been here since I think 1904. That's more than 115 some years. And we know where it came from. It came from a really specific place in Turkey in excavations. So it was found in its origin in the context where it was used. It was found in a burial context, along with hundreds of others. So it was a cemetery where it was found. So I don't have the details of whether the bodies were with it when it was found, but I think we could guess that there probably were human remains associated with the different sarcophagus rims. And this one in particular, we didn't have that come to the museum. So in this case, we only had the object or part of it.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. And did you want the image with the bull and the
Maybe,
panthers?
yeah, let's do that one.
Okay. All right. Here you go.
So this is an example of that step of toning and painting that I was describing with the bowl in the lab. This is an example on the sarcophagus of what we're doing now. We're toning those areas of missing material. We're painting the new fills to make them match the surroundings so that you can see what's happening in the picture a little bit better. I see a lot of questions, Lauren.
Yeah. Well, I know we're about to our ending point. If there are people, if your class, if you have to sign off, thank you so much for joining us. We'll stay on for just another minute and answer a couple of these questions that are coming in. Somebody is wondering if there are meanings to the symbols that are on the sarcophagus rim.
Yes, almost all of the symbols have meanings. So a lot of the things that look like radiating suns, those are flowers. They kind of are intending to tell us that these animals are in an outdoor setting. They're in they're out in the natural environment, let's say. That's what a lot of the kind of floral motifs mean. There's other symbols that mean things like happiness and like long life. And the animals themselves are it's two panthers or cats that are attacking a bull. The bull is upside down. This is just representing a hunt scene, and it's just it's a very typical scene that we see on these kinds of sarcophagus. We see not just bulls, sometimes we see wild boars or gazelles or other types of animals that are hunting.
All right. And somebody is also asking, I don't know if they're referring to a visit to the Museum of Fine Arts in particular, but sounds like they were at a museum and they maybe saw some of the Greek painted pottery. And they were wondering about the person who may have actually created that. And so I'm not sure exactly which piece they're talking about, but maybe we could say something about that, just about ancient artifacts in general.
We definitely know that there were skilled artists that worked on that created these objects, and there was even commonly like a division of labor where some people made the pottery, in this case the sarcophagus rim, like a person who worked with the clay, and then there would have been a different person who applied the decoration, the paint, which is also in this case it's a type of clay called slip. It's very thin and it can be applied with a brush, so it's like painting. And that would have been a different artist. And there probably would have been even another person, or in this case, more than one person, who fired the ceramic or the clay, who turned that, created that kiln, created the fire, and kept everything going as they fired this object from wet clay, or actually dried clay at that time, but into a ceramic. And these objects are so big, like the one we're looking at, that it really would have taken a lot of people, because it would have been a really big kiln and it's a big object to carry. So these are actually people that are working in workshops. Yeah.
Okay. And then this question has come through a couple of times, so I want to make sure this will be our last question. Somebody's wondering about why the names of these places change over time. So like we might refer to it, from being from ancient Greece or something, but then we talk about it, well, it was found in modern day. So why do these place names change? And they're wondering also if that has anything to do with the artifacts.
We try to refer to the objects like we try to use the name of the place from the time period that the object dates when we refer to the object, which is this object. We actually call it a Clazomanian sarcophagus because it's from a town called Clazomenae. So it's actually a town that was culturally speaking Greek, but located in Turkey at that time, because that's the language that people used in that region, and that's the town they lived in. So the word Turkey didn't even exist then. The modern country of Turkey wasn't really formed until the 20th century, I think 20th century. So, so like those modern country names didn't even exist at the time that the sarcophagus did. Right. So I don't know if that kind of helps answer that question.
I think so. Yeah, thank you. All right, well, we are definitely out of time for today. Thank you for all of the really wonderful questions. And thank you, Leanne, for joining the program and sharing all of these really interesting projects with us. Before we sign off, I do just want to let everyone know that we have some teaching resources available for this program that include links to videos and other resources that we have available through the MFA. So please be sure to check those out. And then finally, I just want to mention that coming up in a couple of weeks, we have another program on the art of ancient Greece and Rome, focusing on gods and goddesses. So if you'd like to look at some more ancient art, please join us for that. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.